Right, let's get into some news and views around the world I managed to pick up in a shorter space of time this week. And this new research is now questioning the environmental impact of rising imports of what is known as used cooking oil. And that's going into the UK and Europe in particular, known as chip fat, and other oils are considered waste. So when they are used to make biodiesel, it saves carbon emissions by displacing fossil oil. But such is the demand across Europe that imports now account for more than half of the UCO, used cooking oil, that's made into fuel. And according to the study, there's no way to prove these imports are sustainable. And then they said this, and with no testing of what's coming in, experts believe it's also ripe for fraud. Well, I guess the oil companies are losing too much money, it seems. You think the Greta puppet would come out and support that? No. A press statement this week simply indicated that a Senate Banking Committee would hold its hearing on Wednesday the 26th of May, and the House Financial Services Committee would hold its hearing the following day on Thursday the 27th of May. Now, the announcement indicated that the following CEOs are scheduled to testify: Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, Jane Fraser of Citigroup, James Gorman of Morgan Stanley, Brian Monahan of Bank of America, and Charles Schwab of Wells Fargo. And the question is this about the silver manipulation coming to an end, or an end to the derivatives, or both, or something else? Something sounds big and, of course, pre-planned. Now, what that may entail remains to be seen. But perhaps the trustee can enlighten us on a Portal People channel instead of making fake CNN-style news claims about me, as she has done in the past week, and yet again making statements but providing no proof. It was a nice try, Kim, but an epic failed again, of which you've become all too proficient at. Now, that piece last week has zero to do with me, as I'm not a member of Lifeforce. But a multitude of Lifeforce members are complaining about several misdemeanors which I reported on, and she failed to address a single item, and instead played juvenile-level games of calling people names. And the point to the Lifeforce members is she never addressed a single question. Classic deflection tactics of the portal and agency people. And the Lifeforce members are being abused, threatened, booted, and placed under contracts and non-disclosure statements. And Kim and Tank think this is the way to look after people. It's clearly not. They did not address it. And obviously they think that that's okay. Well, it's not okay with me. That's just why I said something. And it shouldn't be okay to the remaining Lifeforce members. I am aware a number of them are leaving. And as I said, time will always tell. I've never been wrong with that statement yet, and it won't change with this episode either. It's also shameful what they are doing. Cul-de-sac people. Facebook data from over 533 million users was leaked, according to a report last week. And now the company won't even notify the impacted users, according to a representative of Facebook. And Facebook isn't notifying impacted users because the company isn't sure whose data was leaked. Yeah, right. The mass collector of data, and they don't know who was leaked, really. They expect us to believe that. And they said, moreover, since users are unable to fix the issue and the data is already public, Facebook is choosing not to identify and inform the users. Perhaps they sold the identities. Perhaps they're losing money as well. Now, the data leak included phone numbers, full names, locations, email addresses, and biographical information of over 533 million Facebook users from 106 countries. Now, the US users made up the majority, with over 32 million users impacted, with users in the UK and India representing the second and third most impacted regions. Now, these events are really random acts, largely done by Five Eyes groups to obtain data streams on more people or used for financial gains to sell to marketing advertisers. That's how it works. But it is yet again an example of the zero consequences of poor actions afforded to these large companies, yet never to the person on the street. China next. The People's Bank of China published a paper last week, and it says China must fully liberalise its birth control policy to increase its labour force in the up-and-coming decades and compete with such countries as the US economically. And they said Beijing should pay close attention to the fact that the country's birth rate is declining while its population is aging fast. A bit like America then. And the research, which was published by China's central bank as part of its working paper series, suggests that the country's main economic rival, the US, is undergoing favourable changes in working population rates, largely through mass immigration. And based on statistics and forecasts by the United Nations, which might even overestimate China's reproduction rate, according to the researchers, the report suggests that in the next 3 decades, China's population will decrease by 32 million people. At the same time, the US may add 50 million people to its population by 2050. Yet again, this is another example of child-level behaviour. We must compete with the USA. Does anyone ask why? And it was like the story last week when the US jackass said they would put China into poverty to ensure they remain the lead country. It's utter bizarre thinking patterns and child level to the extreme. Here's a novel idea, and here's some common sense for you. How about we share the markets and the wealth? What's wrong with that? Oh my, there he goes again. Common sense. And heaven forbid someone comes up with an adult-based decision. And all governments need to come together and stop this child-level rhetoric spewing out of their mouths. Why do we always have to compete over everything? How about cooperative rhetoric where everyone has enough? You know, is that so hard to think about or contemplate? The US competing with the EU, Russia and China for world domination. And no one asks, why are we doing that? Why? It doesn't benefit the people, does it? America being the lead country. 1 in 6 children in below the poverty line. The US police officer who died during the Capitol riot, as they called it, had 2 strokes and died from natural causes, according to the chief medical examiner in Washington. Now, 2 men are accused of using a type of pepper spray on Officer Brian Sicknick. However, the ruling means they are now unlikely to be charged with homicide. Now, the autopsy found no evidence of an allergic reaction to chemicals, nor of internal or external injuries, according to Dr. Francisco Diaz. Now, Officer Sicknick, who was 42, was defending the Capitol building from supporters of Donald Trump, except they weren't all Donald Trump people, were they? Who stormed it on January the 6th, and he collapsed after returning to his office during the siege and died the next day in hospital. Now, in his ruling, Dr. Diaz found Officer Sicknick died of a medical condition which was not brought on by an injury. Oops. Now, why is that important? Because this proves that every single mainstream media lied about this event. They all said that the officer was murdered by rioters with a heavy hammer. Remember? How can they all get it wrong? Because they're all given the same Mockingbird scripts is why. And yet again, the CIA are caught out with faulty information. And at which point is action taken by authorities to rein in both of them? Because the 2 of them go hand in hand. Or better still, the people can do their part and turn all of their news channels off completely and leave them to their echo chamber. West Virginia, don't talk about that state too much, is about to lose another congressional seat because of a steady population decline, according to Republican lawmakers who are convinced a massive income tax cut is the key to reversing the trend. But figuring out how to do that without harming the state's most vulnerable or punching a massive hole in the budget has proven complicated. Although the United States has doubled its population over the past 7 decades, West Virginia has headed in the other direction. And tracking closely with the long-term decline of the coal industry, it is the only state in the nation with fewer residents than in 1950. And figures from the 2020 US Census, expected to be released later this month, are projected to reduce West Virginia's seats in the US House from 3 to 2. Now, of only people left en masse from New York and left the vulture capitalists swinging, and they would have less votes as well. Fathers in Utah are now legally obliged to pay half the cost of a mother's medical care related to pregnancy and delivery. And supporters of the law, which is thought to be the first of its kind in the US, says it will help alleviate the financial burden of motherhood for American women. Now, the legislation passed with bipartisan support, but it raises questions about the cost of parenting in the US, as well as the state's growing roster of anti-abortion legislation. Now, Utah's shared medical costs law requires biological fathers to pay half of the mother's insurance premiums, her monthly health insurance costs, and during pregnancy, as well as all other related medical fees, including the birth of the child. Now, for US women with insurance, giving birth costs an average of $4,500 out of pocket, according to a study in the Health Affairs Journal that tracked costs from 2008 through 2015. Quite why they haven't got up-to-date figures is beyond me. Perhaps they all went to Johns Hopkins. And for those without coverage, this figure could more than double. The not-for-profit Fair Health Organisation reported that the average was closer to $10,000 per child. Now, if paternity of the child is in question, fathers are able to delay payments until paternity is proven, and the payment process is not automatic. Now, this is similar to child support. If a woman does not seek assistance, the father will not be notified, and the same financial obligation does not apply if a woman wants to terminate the pregnancy. Now, biological fathers will not be required to contribute to the cost of an abortion if it is sought without their consent, except in the case of rape or if the mother's life is in danger. Now, the cost of an abortion without insurance is roughly $1,000, according to the body parts company Planned Parenthood. Now, the law will take effect on May 5th, was passed unanimously with bipartisan support in the state Senate, but faced Democratic opposition in the House of Representatives. I wonder if the lead representatives of the church in Utah will be held accountable for this also. Just saying. As many of the unwanted pregnancies in that state are due to the church and their fake religion out of Egypt. Yes, those of you who live there all know. Underage sex, wife swap parties, multiple partners, and all-round debauchery are considered part of the norm of the life of the Mormons. And at which point do the church take full responsibility for that policy?